2611 More dreadful wraith. The ghostly crewmates of the spectral ship all wielded power similar to that of corrupted abominations. Most were akin to beasts, while the captain was akin to a monster, at least that had been the case during the brief skirmish between the vanguard of the Wraith Armada and the Night Garden in the past. Jet could feel that this particular crew was more powerful than the scouts who had attempted to board the living ship before, and had no doubt that there were far more harrowing, terrifying beings among the ghosts the Dutchman commanded, demons, devils, and even nightmare creatures of the great rank. But it did not matter. The ghastly armada was vast, and there seemed to be an endless number of lost souls populating the ethereal, rotting ships. They were wraiths, which meant that most awakened would be in great peril in a battle against the Dutchman's otherworldly army. But for that very reason, Jet was Their natural adversary. Her aspect allowed her to directly destroy the souls of her enemies, after all. Not only that, but she grew stronger with each enemy she killed. Her essence was replenished, and the cold shattered star of her soul core grew both in size and volume, one dark jagged shard at a time. After 2 relentless decades of chaos and slaughter, her jigsaw soul core had become vast and expansive, looming above her soul sea like a broken sun. And that, in turn, allowed her to augment her undying body with essence far past the limits of what any other awakened was capable of, both granting her fierce power and allowing her to sustain that ferocity for a longer time, almost indefinitely, as long as there were living beings for her to kill. Or undead beings. It mattered not to Jet. As the crew of the spectral ship rose from ghostly light and rushed at her, she saw them clearly. Their ancient armor was shredded and torn, their phantasmal bodies underneath were covered in terrible wounds, and their cold empty eyes burned with ethereal green flames. There was no frenzied hunger or demented fury in their gazes, though, like in those of most nightmare creatures, just torment. Lunging forward to meet the flood of murderous wraiths, Jet spun her war scythe and easily sliced the nearest of specters in half. A mundane blade, or even an enchanted one, would have simply passed through his ephemeral body as if it were passing through mist, but her scythe severed the soul of the spectral abomination just as easily as it would have severed flesh. The silhouette of the ancient wraith rippled and dissolved into a dying flash of pale light, disappearing forever. Those who had managed to slay these peculiar beings before reported that the nightmare spell did not announce their deaths, and there were no soul shards left behind them either. But Jet could clearly feel the end of the ghostly sailor's existence. A stream of essence entered her soul, and a new shard was added to the jagged orb of her broken soul core, making it a fraction bigger. The spell whispered into her ear, as well. You have slain A, you have slain A, you have. However, its voice suddenly faltered and grew indistinct, as if it could not process or express the truth of what had happened, like a machine encountering an error. How curious. It seemed that even the nightmare spell did not quite know what the Dutchman and his wraith armada were, or at least could not speak it. Jet ignored that information, for now. Continuing the motion, she took a step forward while reversing the grip on her weapon and thrust it forward to pierce the chest of the next wraith. Since their ethereal bodies offered the mist blade no resistance, she then fluidly transitioned from a downward thrust into a spin, beheading the one rushing at her from the back. You have slain A. Jet exploded into a hurricane of ice-cold steel, moving across the deck of the ghostly ship like the Grim Reaper. She was a transcendent being, while the spectral sailors were all corrupted, so, in theory, each of them wielded power equal to hers, or at least power that existed in the same realm. Nevertheless, they all fell under her scythe like stalks of wheat, vanishing forever. And whatever essence she burned while harvesting these lost souls was immediately replenished by the streams of essence she received from the kills. The captain of the ship was far more powerful than his subordinates, but he dissolved into ghostly green light in mere seconds, as well. In an astonishingly short amount of time, the deck of the rotting ship became empty, with only Jet standing there, bathed in an eerie glow and the echoes of the brutal violence that had just been perpetrated here. Still, she felt like her job here was not finished, yet. So, Jet plunged the blade of her scythe into the deck itself, aiming to destroy the soul of the ship. That, she felt, was the real monster. It took several blows, and just as she suspected, a torrent of essence more potent than all the previous ones flowed into her soul as the shape of the ship dimmed, slowly disappearing into the bright daylight. At the same time, an explosion of radiance escaped from somewhere deep within its hold, accompanied by a litany of otherworldly groans. As if a swarm of tortured souls was suddenly set free. Jet smiled darkly, thinking that she was starting to unravel the secret nature of the sinister Wraith Armada, or at least the nature of its lesser ships. Just before the spectral ship disappeared completely, she pushed herself off its broken deck and soared high into the air, flying across the sky. Breaching hundreds of meters with that single jump, Jet landed on the NEXT ship in a maelstrom of cold steel, wreaking havoc among its crew and harvesting their souls to empower her own. Behind her, the Night Garden towered like a fortress of weathered wood, and her soldiers were feverishly rushing to reload its mighty cannons. 2612 Horror of the Abyss. While Jet butchered the specters aboard the leading ships of the Wraith Armada and the towering walls of mist slowly approached the Night Garden, another immense tentacle descended on the living ship, aiming to swipe the ascended cannoneers off its deck and destroy the mighty armaments. The invisible aegis protecting them held, but it seemed to be straining in the crushing grasp of Old Tom. Just then, a black arrow fell from the secluded garden on the roof of the mainmast pagoda, followed by an enormous javelin that seemed to be forged from pure darkness. The violence of their impact was so horrific that the immense tentacle was torn open and maimed, releasing its hold on the Night Garden in a flood of oily blood. That was Slayer and Saint entering the battle from the privacy of Soul Reaper's garden. Sunny had not left the great citadel unguarded before diving into the dark depths, of course. And there, in those dark depths, Sunny, Serpent, Knave, and Bloodwave continued to descend into the crushing cold abyss as they pursued the wounded tentacles of the ancient horror. No light penetrated the mass of water far enough to illuminate their surroundings, so they found themselves in utter, absolute darkness. Of course, Sunny could sense the movement of shadows and pierce the veil of darkness with his gaze. The Saints of Night, meanwhile, navigated the lightless abyss with their own powers. If anything, they were more at home in the depths than he was. Still, Sunny was certain that even the descendants of the House of Night didn't dive that deep often. The wounded tentacles retreated downward with spectacular speed, leaving billowing trails of oily blood in their wake. As he pursued them, the water grew colder and colder. Much more palpable, however, was the mounting pressure of its great mass. They had long passed the point where mundane humans, or even machines they created, would have been crushed by the pressure of the dark abyss. Then, they passed the point where awakened would have been killed, as well. By the time they reached the point where Ascended could have survived, even Sunny could feel the terrible pressure constricting his movements. The intricately shaped plates of the jade mantle groaned as they scraped against each other, and the onyx serpent shell was sustaining minor, but continuous damage, forcing him to mend it as they continued the descent. The water had turned eerie here, acting in odd ways. And yet, the tentacles continued to flee into the darkness, and Sunny still could not sense their source. Just how deep does that horror dwell? The irreverent nickname made one forget what Old Tom truly was, at times, as well as the fact that nobody truly knew the shape and nature of that eldritch horror. All they had ever seen of it were the immense tentacles that reached toward the surface from far below. And now, Sunny finally sensed something. It was not the body of Old Tom, though. Instead of it, a swarm of immense tentacles suddenly shot from the dark abyss, rising toward them like a terrifying forest of slithering, gigantic vines. Sunny was taken aback for a short moment. During the previous attacks, the terrifying dweller of the depths had never attacked the Night Garden with more than 7 of its LOing limbs. Now, however, there were dozens of them reaching toward Sunny and his companions, each comparable in size to the immense tentacles that could wrap themselves around the titanic vastness of the Night Garden. It was as if the abyss itself had come alive to destroy them. Now, where the hell has good old Tom been hiding all these? Sunny shook off his bewilderment and pushed his enormous body forward to meet the dark forest of colossal tentacles. It seemed that they had underestimated Old Tom, a tad. There was no time to regret this failure of imagination, though, because soon, the tentacles were upon them. Sunny was the vanguard of their group, and the most powerful among them as well, so, it was his duty to break the momentum of the harrowing tide of dark flesh. Just before the tentacles reached him, he gritted his teeth and released the defensive barrier of the onyx serpent shell, allowing it to dissolve into the darkness. He released the constraints giving his own shadow a shape, as well, and let it spread to its true, unfathomable vastness. In the next moment, Sunny turned into a vast cloud of formless darkness. And from that darkness, dozens of long tendrils stretched forward, clashing with those of Old Tom. Of course, Sunny was not quite as immense as the horror of the depths, but his will was infused with the essence of death, so his touch was far more lethal. The grotesque clash tore apart the abyss, forcing the mass of water crushed by the unbearable pressure to flow like a current. Somewhere far above, grotesque waves rose, scattering the ghostly armada and making the Night Garden sway. Serpent, Knave, and Bloodwave swam through the carnage of intertwined tentacles and tendrils of darkness, sinking their fangs into Old Tom's flesh. The frightening chaos of the deep-water battle continued unabated, and at some point, seething from murderous rage and pain permeating his wounded shadow, Sunny realized that the sea around them was changing. It seemed that Old Tom was pushing them toward the surface. At the same time, he sensed that the number of tentacles the terrifying depth dweller unleashed upon them was gradually reducing, as if not all of them were long enough to reach that far up. It's trying to retreat. Old Tom might not have been wary of Sunny and the night garden, but it seemed reluctant to let them close to its hidden body. So, it wanted to retreat back into the depths. They had dealt it enough damage to make the horror of The depths take them seriously, at least. Or perhaps it simply judged that the night garden itself had sustained enough damage to stall its arrival in the Eternal City. The question was, would Sunny let the eerie horror escape once more? Damn it all. Sunny forced himself to coalesce back into a human shadow and covered it by the fearsome carapace of the jade mantle, using the feather of truth to make it just buoyant enough to stay in place. Casting a dark gaze at the battered tentacles of Old Tom, he gritted his teeth. The sea had turned black from the blood of the horrid creature of the depths. But he wasn't unscathed, either. There was a decision to be made. 2,613 two captains. Far above, the night garden swayed as gigantic waves crashed into its hull. The Wraith Armada was scattered, but remained unscathed, continuing its swift advance as the towering wall of mist devoured the world behind it. The forward ships of the ghostly fleet were gone, though, their spectral crews eviscerated by the ruthless blade of the Reaper. Jet had sustained some wounds, but the chilling slaughter she had perpetrated effortlessly overshadowed their severity. And, unlike how any other awakened would, she was not growing tired. If anything, the more enemies she slayed, the more alive she looked, as if the dark splendor of the unending slaughter filled her with vitality. There were two problems, though. The first one was that the deeper into the Wraith Armada she went, the more powerful her enemies became. The last captain she had killed was definitely strong enough to have been a great nightmare abomination, and the ship itself refused to be destroyed in just a few strikes. In the end, she had nearly taken it apart with her scythe before the spectral vessel finally succumbed. The closer a spectral vessel was to the Dutchman in the formation of the ghostly fleet, the more sinister it seemed to be. On top of that, deeper into the Armada, the ships had not been damaged by the initial bombardment of the Night Garden's mighty cannons, so their crews were entirely unscathed when she attacked them. The bigger problem, however, was that Jet was just one woman. No matter how powerful she was, there were too many ships in the Wraith Armada for her to take on alone. Already, countless vessels were overtaking the area where she rampaged, sailing toward the Night Garden outside her reach. And the Dutchman itself was drawing closer and closer. Severing the mast of a ghostly ship and shattering its deck with a devastating strike of the flat side of the scythe, Jet paused for a moment and looked back. How much longer? She seemed to have bought her soldiers enough time. With Jet destroying the forward ships and the tall waves slowing down the advance of the Eerie fleet, they managed to reload the cannons in time. Looking up, she saw the dark chasms of 24 enormous barrels staging at her from the living ship's deck. It was only then that Jet realized how unpleasant it was to be on the receiving end of these dark, terrifying siege weapons. Damnation! In the next moment, the cannons thundered, sending 24 radiant orbs of essence-infused metal flying at the ghostly fleet with terrible speed. It was really like a swarm of meteors was plummeting from the sky. The impact was not that different from a celestial calamity, either. The spectral ships that had overtaken Jet's area of control were erased from existence, exploding into pale flashes of eerie light. The Night Garden had received a bit more breathing room. But it was still not enough. Jet knew that there would be no third salvo. The ghost ships would reach her citadel, and the ancient wraiths would board it soon. With her most powerful warriors lured away by Old Tom, the defenders of the Night Garden would inevitably sustain casualties while trying to repel the attack. And then, the mist would swallow the world, heralding the arrival of the Dutchman. What would happen next, Jet did not know. Pursing her lips, she delivered the finishing attack to the mangled ghost ship and leapt to the next one. Landing on its deck, she slaughtered her way to its stern and climbed the steps there, gazing at the vast Wraith Armada over the vanishing phantom of the slain captain. By then, there were already wisps of mist floating over the restless water around her. She could see the Dutchman far better than ever before, too. Its tall sides, the countless scars marring the batty red expanse of its hull, the gaping wounds where it had been breached by untold attacks, its tattered sails, its skeletal masts, the eerie desolation of its vast deck. And the ethereal figure standing at its bridge, shrouded in a torn cloak. Jet looked at the captain of the Dutchman, and felt him looking back. From that distance, she couldn't discern much about him. The man, if it was, indeed, a man, was tall, with broad shoulders and an imposing posture. His figure was elusive and ghostly, as if he were there and not at the same time. She couldn't see his face, but she thought she glimpsed his eerie eyes. Two piercing, sea-colored flames were burning in the pale shadow of his ghastly face, regarding her with a chilling calmness. Sensing a subtle change in the motion of the sea, Jet smiled slightly as she met his gaze. Finally, just then, the world underwent a strange transformation. The sun plummeted into the waves, leaving a trail of light behind it. Darkness enveloped the world, and radiant silver streaks crossed out the sky. Then, the sun shot from behind the eastern horizon, chasing away the darkness, only to drown in the west a few moments later. The breathtaking spectacle repeated itself several times, as if someone had hit the fast-forward button and sent time flowing at an astonishing pace. But it all ended swiftly, and the Stormzea was suddenly enveloped by the darkness of the night. Countless stars ignited in the vast black sky. Which meant, Jet's smile widened a little. In the next moment, the radiance of the distant stars grew brighter, and the starlight was woven into a vast silver net. It fell upon the Wraith Armada, slicing dozens of ships apart and destroying them in mere moments. A cold wind blew across the sea, sending Jet's hair flying. That was Aether unleashing his aspect. Now that the night had fallen, he could finally call upon the stars to destroy their enemies, and the starlight he summoned seemed like the nemesis of the ghostly fleet. The first time the Night Garden had clashed with the wraiths commanded by the Dutchman, it was the young Saint of Night who had turned the tide. Jet remained still, looking at the captain of the Dutchman with a cold smile. He looked at her too as the starlight poured on the spectral vessels of the ghostly armada, piercing them like a rain of silver spears. Well, what will it be? Would he press the attack or call a retreat? Was she imagining things, or did she see an echo of a faint, terrifying smile on the face of the mysterious wraith, as well? A few moments later, the captain of the Dutchman looked away. The mist swelled, and the fearsome silhouette of the ghastly flagship was swallowed by it, vanishing without a trace. The vessels of the Wraith Armada disappeared, as well, gone like the vestiges of an eerie nightmare. The wall of mist was torn apart by the wind. Soon enough, the surface of the sea calmed down, and nothing hinted that there had been a fleet of phantoms on its surface just a few moments ago. The battle in the depths seemed to have concluded as well, since no tentacles rose from the depths to attack the Night Garden anymore. Jet lingered for a few moments, then let out a relieved sigh. It seemed that they had survived another day. 2614 late to the party. The battle was over. The mist dissipated, and the foaming water calmed down. The Wraith Armada was gone, having vanished like a fleeting apparition. Old Tom had retreated back into the abyssal depths. The Night Garden had earned several new scars, its living hull slowly repairing itself in the pale starlight. The awakened soldiers emerged from under the deck, and the ascended officers who had manned the cannons were catching their breath while leaning on the railings, a cold breeze caressing their pale faces. Soul Reaper Jet had already returned aboard her ship, somewhat battered but mostly unscathed. Her armor was in need of some mending, so she dismissed it in favor of a set of comfortable mundane clothes. Not long after, the Saints of Night climbed onto the deck of the Night Garden, as well. They were met with loud cheers. Facing Old Tom in the dark depths of the Stormzea was an admirable act, after all, not to mention the awesome feat of driving the dreadful creature away. On top of that, everyone was under the impression that they had fought the fiend alone. While Knave and Bloodwave were being celebrated by the awakened soldiers, Sunny crawled out of the shadows in the quiet seclusion of Jet's private garden and sprawled on the grass with a groan. He felt absolutely miserable. All that for nothing. In the end, he had let Old Tom go. It was unclear whether he could have defeated it otherwise, out there in the abyssal depths, but Sunny still felt disappointed that he had not even received a chance to try. He would have probably pursued the eerie horror if he had been alone, but at the moment, he also had to consider the Night Garden and its passengers. So, Sunny had chosen the less unhinged strategy and swallowed his desire to tear Old Tom limb from limb, returning to the surface instead. Now, he was enduring the torment of his wounds with nothing to show for it. At the end there, he had been forced to face the horror of the depths without the defensive barrier of a shell, in his true form, that of a vast, formless shadow. That had helped him salvage the battle, but also left him vulnerable to receiving soul damage. That was fine, though, because Soul Weave was already mending his tattered soul, and somewhere in the depths, Old Tom was suffering, as well, having been poisoned by his death will. Thinking about that last part made Sunny feel much better, filling him with vindictive joy. Saint stood silently to his left, guarding his sprawled form. Slayer, meanwhile, was leaning against a tree some distance away, almost indistinguishable from the deep shadows around her. Soon enough, Jet joined him in the garden, as well. Sitting down nearby, she let out a long sigh and said in a wistful tone. "It's strange, isn't it? We did not lose the battle, and yet, it doesn't feel like we've won it either." Sunny spared her a brief look and shrugged. "Doesn't seem odd at all." He lingered for a few moments, and then asked. "That creepy feeling I got while fighting Old Tom, the Dutchman made an appearance, didn't it?" Jet nodded. "Yes, just as expected. It vanished once the night fell, though." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "Did Ether chase it away?" Jet remained silent for a while, then sighed again. It was not so much that it was scared away by Ether as that it chose to leave once the stars, and the map hidden in them, revealed themselves once again. We, Old Tom, and the Dutchman are not the only candidates left in the race, after all. So, I think it simply decided not to waste time, especially considering that the Night Garden had already sustained some damage by then. She paused. "In truth, I managed to vanquish a few ships, but the ones destroyed by Ether and your cannons are not really gone. They were simply dispelled, so they'll return after a while. So, the damage we dealt to the Ghost Fleet was negligible." Jet gave him a dark look. "If I am correct, then the ghost sailors are merely emanations of the Shi-Ro, lost souls bound to their sinister vessels and imprisoned by them, forever. Every time the sailors are destroyed, they return into the holds, and then get summoned to man the ships again later, in a never-ending cycle." She exhaled slowly. "Well, unless someone like me ends it. The ships themselves are merely emanations of the Dutchman, though, when they are destroyed, the wells of souls contained within them are drawn back into its great hold, in turn, so the Ghost Armada can never really be vanquished unless the Dutchman itself is destroyed. It's like one big cursed nesting doll. That is what I concluded after sinking a few of those creepy ships, at least." Jet sighed and looked at the stars. "The only thing I am not clear on is the captain of the Dutchman. Is he just another prisoner of that cursed ship, or are the ship and its curse manifestations of his power? I do not know." Sunny smiled faintly. "I have no idea, either." Jet remained silent for a while. "The Dutchman and its ghost fleet remind me of something, though. I've met a similar being before, I think." Sunny chuckled. "Well, of course you have. I am right here." Indeed, what Jet described was eerily similar to Sunny's own Shadow Legion. His shadows shared a kind of kinship with wraiths, and they too could never truly be destroyed, only vanquished for a while, banished back to the dark expanse of his soul, where they were mended and repaired by its tenebrous flames. Unless someone like Jet got involved, that was. She shook her head slowly. "No, I don't mean you." After considering something for a second or two, she added. "A while back, I killed a great devil, the Heart of Connacht. It commanded a swarm of imprisoned souls, as well." Sunny blinked a few times, thinking about the implications. Eventually, he shrugged. "Well, we will inevitably learn more about the Dutchman soon, whether we want or not." The Night Garden was resting now, drifting among the waves, but it would continue the journey to the Eternal City soon. Whatever dangers they had faced along the way would most likely pale in comparison to what was waiting for them there. He hesitated for a few moments, then asked. "So, what are we going to do? Chase after Old Tom and the Dutchman in hopes of getting to the Eternal City first?" Jet shook her head slowly. "The Night Garden is damaged, and you don't look too good either. It is better to wait a couple of days and arrive at the party in top form. There's no telling what will meet us at the end of the road, after all, but there's definitely going to be a slaughterhouse just shy of it. So, we should give the other contenders a chance to properly greet each other before joining the fun." Sunny smiled lazily. "Fun, you say? Aren't you afraid that they will get to the prize before us?" Jet chuckled and shook her head. "Not at all." He gave her a surprised look. "What? Why?" Standing up, she looked at him with pity and shook her head. "I mean, the road to the Eternal City is already that bad. Whatever is hidden there is bound to be 10 times worse, though. And that's not something even the likes of Old Tom or the Dutchman can deal with in a day or two." Laughing quietly, Jet nodded at Saint and walked away. Left alone, Sunny turned to the stars and spent some time enjoying the quiet rustle of the leaves in peace. After a while, he murmured. "That makes me wonder, maybe I need to get myself a garden, too." 2615 No regrets. Several days later, the Night Garden had largely repaired itself. There were still marks left on the weathered surface of its hull, but they did not affect its overall durability. Sunny was feeling better, as well, and the soldiers had received a much-needed reprieve from the draining intensity of the perilous voyage. Guided by the stars, the living ship resumed its journey. Sunny and Jet had both turned somber and taciturn, knowing that the Eternal City, and the unknown dangers waiting for them there, were drawing close now. Jet had entrusted the helm of the Night Garden to Ether and walked to the bow of the Titanic ship, looking at the distant horizon with a contemplative expression. Starlight infused the darkness with a pale silver radiance, and the cold breeze was blowing from the west, ruffling her raven-black hair. Her icy blue eyes seemed to glow with a chilling shine in the dark expanse of the quiet night. After a while, a black crow landed on her shidiyar, waited for a few moments, and then pecked her on the cheek, as if to see if she was alive. Jet pushed the echo off with an irritated scowl. "This again, in your dreams, idiot." Pushed off her shoulder, Crow scrambled to take flight and flew up to land on a piece of the ship's rigging a few meters away. There, it opened its wings and stared at her with righteous indignation. "Corpse, corpse." It jumped up and down a couple of times, as if wanting to express a complaint. "Food, food." Jet gave it an unamused glance. "Not this corpse." Then, looking at it darkly, she added in a husky voice. "Bird, soup." Crow stared at her silently for a few moments, then folded its wings and took a few hurried hops away, just to be safe. A pale smile appeared on Jet's lips. Not long after that, Sunny emerged from her shadow and leaned on the railing, giving Crow a curious glance. "I've always meant to ask, that echo of yours, it's unusually animated, isn't it?" Jet remained silent for a bit, then turned to him and shrugged. "I guess." She called Crow over and ruffled its feathers. "It was a gift from the old man. So, Crow is a bit special." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "The old man, wake of ruin." Jet nodded absent-mindedly, then glanced at him with a wry smile. "Why, is that so surprising?" Sunny scratched the back of his head, not sure how to answer. Wake of Ruin was a cantankerous old man, and his personality left a lot to be desired. It was hard to imagine him giving gifts to his subordinates, even if there seemed to be a complicated relationship between him and Jet. "No, it's just, he doesn't strike me as a generous man." Jet grinned. "You're an astute judge of character, Sunny." Sunny remained silent for a while, remembering the bits and pieces of what he knew about Jet's past. The kind of advice she gave him in his youth spoke volumes about what her own experiences had been, but Jet never mentioned the details directly. Eventually, he asked with a hint of caution in her voice. "Your work for the government, it has not always been entirely voluntary, has it?" Jet lingered for a few moments, then offered him a noncommittal shrug. "Well, as far as relationships go, that one used to be a bit toxic at times." She sighed and glanced at the dark expanse of undulating water in front of them. "But you are wrong if you think that it was not voluntary. It is true that after discovering my flaw, they put a leash around my neck and exploited me, but I chose to be exploited myself. I needed to kill in order to survive, and I knew that the government would provide me with plenty of prey. So I was using them, as well. It was a mutual relationship, no matter how toxic." Jet fell silent for a bit and then shuddered faintly. "Gods know it was way better than what would have happened to me in a legacy clan. That, I don't even want to think about." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "What about going independent?" Jet glanced at him with a faint smile. "You must have always been strong, Lord of Shadows. Most awakened can't survive in the dream realm alone. I certainly couldn't, especially considering the demands of my flaw. I haven't always been the Soul Reaper, after all. I was quite weak and unremarkable, out there in the beginning." She looked away and let out a sigh. "But even if I could have, I am glad that I didn't. Left to my own devices, I would have rapidly gone feral. And then, I would have truly become a walking corpse, slowly rotting away while not caring about anything except satisfying my base desires, until there was nothing left of me except for an unfeeling, murderous husk." Jet shook her head. "People like us tend to value independence, Sunny, but there has to be something in our lives larger than us. It is fine to live an unremarkable life, but it all falls apart when power is added to the equation. We did not choose to wield power, but it was thrust upon us nonetheless, not that we would have refused it if we could. No one who had tasted true weakness would ever refuse power, after all." She turned and looked at him, her usual laid-back smile long gone. "But power corrupts, Sunny. Its corruption is no less insidious than the corruption of the void, so one needs something greater than themselves to stave it off, Just like Neff and her domain stave off corruption from the millions of mundane humans living in the dream realm. It can be principles, conviction, duty, devotion, or faith, anything that keeps you going even when all you want to do is fall down, and reminds you where you were heading in the first place. Jet studied him somberly, then suddenly gave him an easy smile and looked away. Personally, I sort of stumbled on what keeps me going by accident. I joined the government out of necessity, developed a misguided sense of professional pride, and only then found meaning in what I do. So, despite all the ugly things that happened along the way, I consider myself lucky. Oh, and it wasn't all bad. There were nice moments, too, really, if you think about it, I am nothing short of blessed. Sunny remained silent for a long while, looking at her with a subdued expression. Then, inhaling deeply, he asked, "So, no regrets?" Jet chuckled. "Life is too short for regret. Plus, look at me." She smiled faintly, wielding fearsome power, ruling a gorgeous city, enjoying the respect and adoration of many people, and living in a fancy palace with a private garden. Who would have thought that a dull, timid girl from the outskirts whom no one cared about would end up that way? For a dead woman, I did pretty well for myself. Don't you think? Sunny smiled. Yes, pretty well, I'd say. He lingered for a bit, the smile slowly draining from his face. So, let me ask you a question. Jet gave him a curious look. Sure, go ahead. Sunny considered his words for a while. He wanted to ask Jet the same thing he had asked Effie. And Kai, whether she would discard personal freedom in pursuit of something that demanded complete submission, whether she would surrender herself completely to something that left her no choice but utter devotion. But now, he realized that there was no point in answering. Because Jet had already answered. Her answer remained the same as it had been all those years ago, remaining as firm as her quiet, unassuming determination. Sunny sighed. Well, that place where you are heading to. What does it look like? Jet laughed. Oh, that old thing. She paused for a few moments. Why, it's a world where people can live in peace and prosperity. A world where everyone is afforded the dignity they deserve and doesn't have to suffer bloodshed and strife. A gentle world, a place where kindness trumps cruelty. Saying that, Jet looked away and smiled wistfully. Funnily enough, it is also a place where someone like me can never exist. Isn't that ironic? There is no space for me in the world I am building. So, in a way, that makes me the architect of my own destruction. Sunny remained silent, not knowing how to answer. Perhaps there was no need to answer, to begin with. They stayed quiet side by side as the night garden sailed across the waves, drawing closer and closer to the mysterious places the path to which was written in the stars. Where untold horrors and terrifying creatures were waiting for them, ready to tear them apart. The stars shone softly, illuminating their thorny path. 2616 finish line. Carried by invisible winds, the night garden could reach truly astonishing speed. Still, it took the living ship 2 more days to reach the area pointed out by the stars, a measure of time largely meaningless in the Stormsia, where the movement of celestial bodies was strange and unpredictable, but was still used by humans both out of habit and out of necessity. Most of that time had been spent battling a calamitous storm, but at the end of the second day, the winds died down, and the unbridled fury of the Stormsia was replaced by an eerie calm. Instead of the blinding radiance of cascading bolts of lightning and an unceasing torrent of rain, wisps of fog drifted above the endless expanse of rolling waves. The stars revealed themselves from behind the cloud just long enough to give the Saints of Night an opportunity to confirm that the night garden had reached its destination, and were then swiftly swallowed by a veil of mist. The world brightened, leaving the cold embrace of darkness in favor of the pale ambivalence of twilight. Not needing the star map anymore, Sunny deactivated the enchantment that had revealed it to the world. The night garden might not have been the first to reach the destination, but that way, it would be the last. The living ship slowed down, drifting cautiously through the mist. Nobody knew what to expect from this place, so both the soldiers and their commanders were tense, staring into the gray vastness of the misty sea with apprehension. Sounds traveled far in the fog, so the measured murmur of waves splashing against the hull of the night garden could be heard even from the great height of its deck. Well, this has gone better than I expected. Jet and Sunny were at the observation deck at the bow of the Titanic ship. No different from the soldiers, they stared into the mist, trying to determine what was awaiting them ahead. The Eternal City was supposed to be here, somewhere, but the map was not exactly rich with detail about what it looked like, and what obstacles approaching it posed. Of course, they were not merely looking. Sunny had cast his shadow sense far and wide, enveloping a vast swath of the Stormzea in a net of his perception. Jet, meanwhile, had sent Crow to scout ahead and report its findings to her. Feeling a little disturbed by what he sensed, Sunny raised an eyebrow. Better than expected. How do you mean? She shrugged with an easy smile. I mean that we reached the destination without suffering catastrophic damage or grievous casualties. The worst that has happened is being beset by a dozen or so of chillingly powerful abominations and an unimaginable horror or two. Smooth sailing, really. Sunny gave her a dubious look, then said in a slightly offended tone. You had really low expectations for the feasibility of this expedition, it seems. Jet grinned. Having low expectations is the secret of living life free of disappointment, after all. She lingered for a few moments, then inhaled deeply and furrowed her brow. What is that smell? The water was far below them, but underestimating the senses of a saint was never a good idea. Sunny still gave Jet a surprised look. You can smell it. He looked down somberly. It's blood. Jet could not see it because of the mist, but actually, this entire area of the Stormzea had turned a vivid shade of red, having been contaminated by an unimaginable amount of blood. Sunny could not discern its color either, but he could sense other things. The Night Garden drifted forward, sailing on a sea of blood. It wasn't simply moving through the red waves, though. The hull of the living ship was absorbing the blood, subtly clearing the water around it. From time to time, a mangled chunk of flesh would brush against its bow, and be consumed, as well. It was quite an eerie scene, to say the least. Sunny sighed. This whole area is drowned in blood and littered with torn corpses, pieces of torn corpses, at least. I think your decision to arrive late was wise. It seems like a terrible battle concluded here just recently. The nightmare creatures who were still in the race must have clashed for the chance to reach the Eternal City. There was Old Tom and the Dutchman, but there must have been countless more abominations whom the Night Garden had never encountered. The Stormzea was vast, after all, and not every contender had been following the stars from its eastern reaches. The weaker of the terrifying fiends would have perished on the way, but the strongest and truly terrifying ones would have all made it here. And then, they would have eradicated each other, with the most terrible one emerging as victor. Sunny hummed, maybe we should find mysterious star maps more often. Then, the nightmare creatures would do us a favor and all kill each other. It wasn't half bad, to have some of the greatest threats in the Stormzea reduce their own population so thoroughly. That said, the being who had slaughtered all these ancient horrors and came out on top was still out here, somewhere, already approaching the Eternal City. Sunny would have to face it there, so his satisfaction was overshadowed by dark anticipation. As if to illustrate his description, a dark form suddenly revealed itself from the mist. It was as wide as a small island, protruding a few hundred meters above the waves, so, it seemed small and insignificant in front of the towering wall of the Night Garden's hull. It was a chunk of flesh torn from the body of some enormous monstrosity. As the living ship drew closer, it dwarfed the grotesque island of mangled flesh even more, then effortlessly pushed it aside. Sunny sighed. All this meat, going to waste. Jet gave him a strange look, then rolled her eyes. Nothing is stopping you from diving down to salvage it, you know. Sunny shivered. No thanks. Why would I? I don't even need to eat, actually. She looked away with a faint smile. For a while, there was nothing but silence between them. Tendrils of mist moved slowly across the deck of the Night Garden, and myriad lanterns illuminating it shone like islands of warm light in the cold expanse of twilight vastness. Some time later, Sunny frowned. Noticing his somber expression, Jet raised her scythe a little. What is it? He lingered for a few moments, then grimaced. Nothing. That's the thing, I sense nothing. There is no sign of the Eternal City anywhere around us, for at least 100 kilometers in every direction. There were no signs of anything that could lead them to it, either, like a stele with runes carved into it or ancient gates that opened a portal to some unknown location. Considering that the Eternal City could not be reached by usual means, Sunny would not be surprised to encounter something like that. But there was nothing except for the vast expanse of the bloody sea, the mist, and the morbid remnants of the terrible battle that had happened here. Not long after, Crow returned from its patrol and landed on Jet's shoulder, cawing loudly. Crow, back. She winced and tilted her head, moving her ear away from the small bird's black beak. Yes, good job. Did you find something in the mist, yes or no? Crow stared at her for a few moments, then fluttered its wings proudly. No. Jet let out an exasperated sigh. After remaining silent for a short while, she asked in an uncertain tone. That map wouldn't have led us to nothing at all, would it? Sunny shook his head. Definitely not. Everything Weaver did had a reason, plus, whoever won the battle is nowhere to be seen. They would have hung around if there had been no path to the Eternal City here, searching. The fact that they are not here suggests that there is a path after all. I think. Jet sighed. Well, let's continue exploring. The night garden continued to drift through the fog, but even after several hours, Sunny could not sense anything in the vast area around them. In situations like this one, it was usually best not to hurry. They could slowly explore this region of the Stormsia in search of clues, spending days or even weeks to accomplish the task. However, Sunny was pressed for time. Time was not standing still in the rest of the world, after all, and things that demanded his attention were slowly accumulating. Plus, they had competition. The monster who had triumphed in the frightening battle was already ahead of them in the race, nearing the finish line or already there, so, Sunny could not wait that long. Luckily, or unfortunately, he had a way to save them quite a bit of time. Grimacing, Sunny summoned Weaver's mask and said as it settled on his face. Oh, I am looking forward to this so much. 2617 Black Skies. The last time Sunny had used Where is My Eye? Enchantment of Weaver's mask, his own eyes were burned, rendering him blind. In fact, his vision recovered fully only just recently, so, naturally, he did not want to lose it again on the eve of a perilous battle. However, there was a learning curve to everything. The fact that he had been seriously harmed the first time around did not mean that he would suffer just as badly now. Back then, Sunny had not known what touching the strings of fate implied, so he treated them carelessly. He believed that things would be different now. If he held himself back, the damage he sustained would probably be significantly reduced. Granted, he would learn much less as a result, as well, catching perhaps only a glimpse or two. And even if his expectation was proven wrong, he would still be able to fight quite well by relying on shadow sense. The danger of witnessing something he was not supposed to see still remained, though. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. With a sigh, Sunny gave Jet a poignant stare. Would he end up on the floor again? No, but seriously, what is it with Jet and slapping me back to my senses? That was how their relationship started, and even all these years later, things were still the same. Knowing that there was no point in stalling, Sunny activated Where is My Eye? Once again, the inconceivable vastness of the torn tapestry of fate revealed itself to him. And once again, he was completely overwhelmed by it. This time, however, his experience helped him shut most of it out faster. Following the steps he had taken before, Sunny limited the scope of his perception to only one tiny fraction of the unfathomable infinity of endless threads, concentrating only on those of them that had to do with this area of the Stormsia. He had an easier time searching for a thread having to do with the Eternal City because he knew that the Night Garden was connected to it, had been built there, even. So, the string of fate he was searching for would pass through the living ship, as well. It did not take him long to discover a worthy candidate. Not too far from him, a peculiar thread extended from the sky into the sea, piercing the deck of the Night Garden. There was an odd duality to it, with the upper reaches of it being woven out of silver starlight, while the lower were woven out of impenetrable darkness. Reaching for the unusual string of fate, Sunny brushed his fingers against it. This time, he was careful to only touch for a brief moment and instantly pull away. That way, he hoped, the truth revealed to him would be modest in scope, and therefore, his eyes and his mind would be spared most of the damage. His hope turned out not to be unfounded. But before Sunny confirmed it, he was assaulted by an astonishing vision. What the hell is this? He was horrified for a moment, because what met him was a boundless, dark void. However, thankfully enough, it was not the void. It was merely a void. An infinite, silent, empty expanse of vacuous darkness where nothing existed, no life, no warmth, not even air. Only lethal rays of cosmic radiation and invisible blossoms of gravity fields. And in that darkness, innumerable stars burned with radiant silver light. Sunny was stunned. Holy hell, I'm in space. Indeed, this was the great vacuum of space. But at that moment, he realized something else, as well. That this was also the Black Skies, the true realm of the goddess of night. And there, among the stars, a radiant city with tall silver spires bathed in the starlight. Sunny pulled his hand away, and the vision of the Eternal City vanished from his straining mind. So it's in space. Sunny remained motionless for what felt like an eternity, but only lasted a brief moment. No, that did not make sense, as much as everything never made sense in the dream realm. Nightwalker had managed to board the Night Garden and sail away from the Eternal City, and at the moment, the Night Garden could not fly, let alone travel between stars. Sunny hesitated for a while, then tentatively touched the string of fate once more. He saw the Eternal City once again. Only, this time, it was in a state of chaos. It was under attack. A vast presence moved in the darkness beyond the city. Its shape were impossible to discern, since it was indistinguishable from the darkness of space. Perhaps it was the darkness itself, and the only way to perceive its existence was by watching the vast swaths of stars be obscured by its passing. The presence was horrifying, unfathomable, and full of cold, indifferent, obliterating ENT. Wherever her pale gaze fell, the immortal denizens of the Eternal City were unmade. The silver spires melted and fell, and the very fabric of the celestial abode was consumed by entropy. But then, the city rose from the dust. Its fabric was mended, the spires coalesced from incandescent pools of liquid matter, and the living beings were restored to their pristine youthfulness. Only to be destroyed again. A million cycles of death and restoration, passed in the blink of an eye. It was an eternity of devastation. The immortals screamed in terror as they died, and wept in horror as they were mercilessly brought back to life. Moments flowed into seconds, and seconds flowed into minutes. Minutes turned into hours, and hours turned into days. Days. Sunny pulled his hand away and staggered, horrified. What did I just see? Trembling, he imagined the dreadful scene once more. Slowly, hesitantly, he realized what he had witnessed. It was a battle. It had been a battle between Storm God and the Demon of Repose. Then, there was only one thing he needed to learn. Drawing in a shaky breath, Sunny extended his hand toward the string of fate once more. He saw how the Eternal City fell. 2618 Fallen City. Sunny dismissed Weave's mask and stared into the mist with a hollow look on his face. Jet, who was standing nearby with a raised hand, lowered it slowly. Huh, your eyes are not so oct. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, then turned to her, the golden glow slowly disappearing from the deep darkness of his dilated pupils. Eventually, he grimaced. Still hurts like hell, though. His eyes had not turned into embers, this time, but the last image he had seen did end up burned into them, so his vision was a bit blurry. It was going to pass swiftly, though, so he did not mind that much. Jet studied him, then asked in a neutral tone. Well, did you divine any clues? Sunny could not understand what she meant, then realized that she considered his mysterious ability a shape of divination. Which, it was, in a sense. He nodded slowly. Yes, it fell into the sea. Jet blinked a few times. What fell into the sea? Sunny just stared at her. The Eternal City. It fell into the sea. Turning around, he raised a hand and pointed at the sky. Well, he pointed into the mist, but his intention was to point at the sky. It entered the atmosphere, burning like a falling sun, glided majestically down to the horizon, and hit the water like an enormous asteroid. That thing was the size of NQSC, too, so the explosion its impact caused, well, I guess it was in the same weight category as when Nephis detonated 6 of her cores in Godgrave. Catastrophic on a global scale. That latter happened below ground, however, while the former had happened in the middle of a damn sea. He inhaled deeply. Needless to say, the entire city was vaporized. But the Demon of Repose did not care, I guess, because it still restored itself to flawless condition, complete with all the immortals populating it. And then, it drowned. Sunny glanced down, at the wooden deck beneath them. So, the map is pointing to the right spot. It's just that it doesn't have a vertical axis. We are in the right place, but, way above our destination. Jet scratched the tip of his nose. How did Nightwalker manage to sail away on the Night Garden, then? Sunny smiled darkly. Have no idea. Why are you asking me? Go ask Nightwalker. He remained silent for a while, then sighed. Maybe the Night Garden was at the bottom of the sea, as well. Actually, it is good news for us. Jet raised an eyebrow. It is. Sunny nodded. It is a fact that the Eternal City is at the bottom of the Stormzea, and it is also a fact that Nightwalker used the Night Garden to escape the Eternal City and sail to the safer waters near the coast. Which proves my theory that this ship is not just a ship, it can also be a submarine. He lingered for a moment, and then smiled in bewilderment. It can also be a spaceship, actually. We're on a spaceship, Jet. She gave him a suspicious look. That's cool. However, don't think I don't know why you're saying that. Sunny glanced at her with an oblivious look. Huh, whatever do you mean? She smiled dangerously. You said it to distract me from the fact that you want to sink my ship, didn't you? You want to try submerging the Night Garden and diving to the bottom of the sea. Sunny let out a chuckle, as if amazed by the preposterous nature of that remark. Then, he added in a small tone. Yes. Jet let out a long sigh. I'll give you that we can probably submerge the Night Garden by flooding the freshwater reservoir. However, your theory about the Aegis holding the water at bay is questionable at best, and completely unfounded at worst. And since we can hardly test it without causing severe damage to the surface infrastructure of the city, it's a no. Sunny, who was secretly reeling from catching a small glimpse of the harrowing battle between a god and a demon, smiled weakly. Who says that we can't test it? He commanded the shadows to rise, manifesting them into a miniature model of the Night Garden. Then, he built a translucent dome above its deck, and another one, a little smaller, and completely black, below it. I don't think I ever tried manifesting shadows on that scale, but I am certain that I can cover all of the Night Garden with an airtight dome. We will submerge the ship until its masts are underwater and see if the Aegis prevents the water from reaching that dome. If it does, we can descend further. If it doesn't, we simply surface again, send the Night Garden back to the coast, and venture to the bottom of the Stormsia by our lonesome, you and I. Jet still had a dubious expression on her face. Why are you so keen on taking the Night Garden to the Eternal City? Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then sighed. Because the Dreamspawn is on the moon. Jet raised an eyebrow. So oh. She fell silent for a moment, then gave him a calculating look. You're hoping that if we restore the Night Garden to its former glory, we will be able to attack that man before he attacks us. Sunny lingered for a while. It is one of the reasons, yes. I might not seem like it, but I am actually quite nervous about that guy. Ah, don't get me wrong, I am not worried that he'll be able to defeat me and Nephis. However, I am almost entirely certain that if he brings the fight to either the waking world or the dream realm, there will be a lot of collateral damage, a lot of it. If we take the fight to him, though, there are no civilians on the moon. Jet studied him for a bit. Eventually, she grimaced and glanced away. We can try flooding the reservoir. However, we will only continue the descent after making sure that the citizens of the Night Garden are completely safe, and that we can summon Neph's Dreamgate underwater to retreat at the first sign of overwhelming danger. Sunny simply gave her a nod. Naturally. Then, glancing into the mist, he hesitated for a few seconds and asked. What's on the bottom of the Stormsia, anyway? Jet turned back and started walking away, a troubled expression on her face. Her answer did not make him any less apprehensive. Nobody knows. Because nobody has ever reached the bottom of the Stormsia. If we do, we will be the first humans to learn. 2619 Immersion. The Night Garden slowly sank into a sea of blood. The deck had been cleared by then, with all the soldiers joining the civilians in the city below. The Runic Hall was cleared of all non-essential personnel, with only the Saints of Night keeping Jet and Sunny company. The enchanted circle shimmered faintly as Jet deepened her connection to the living ship, drawing more and more water into the vast reservoir at the lowest layer of its vertical structure. The trees growing in the parks and groves on the main deck of the Night Garden swayed, and the water in the lakes rippled. Far below, the waves foamed as the Titanic ship slowly began to submerge. Sunny observed the process from the great height of the Runic Hall for a while, then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. As the ship submerged, the deep shadows populating its main deck stirred, growing deeper and darker. Then, they began to flow upward all across its outer perimeter, climbing higher and higher into the air. Jet and the Saints of Night observed the process with guarded expressions, their eyes widening slightly. It was an incredible sight, indeed. The Night Garden was more than a dozen kilometers in length, and at the moment, darkness rose all across its vast expanse like streams of ink flowing up the surface of an invisible glass dome. Sunny frowned, concentrating. Soon enough, the streams of darkness fused and climbed higher than the roof of the towering pagoda where the Runic Hall, the bridge of the Night Garden, was located. The dome of shadows closed, obscuring the twilight of the outside world. It was as if the living ship was hidden in a great cavern, the warm glow of its lanterns illuminating the echoing darkness. The shadows hardened, turning into black obsidian. Ah, I wonder. Sunny found himself wondering if, perhaps, the Shadow Realm itself had been created in a similar fashion, only on a much, much greater scale. Jet let out a quiet sigh. Damn, no matter how many times I witness a sovereign unleashing their power, it never gets any less humbling. Sunny glanced at her, suddenly curious about what Jet's own supreme power would be. He remained silent for a few moments, then turned away. We are not called demigods without a reason. Attaining supremacy means crossing the threshold between what is mundane and what is divine, so while we are not deities yet, we have a foot in the door. He lingered a little before adding in a more somber tone. It is the next step that is truly vexing. Because to take it, one has to discard what little mundane, and therefore human, is left of them. As his words echoed in the darkness, the night garden continued to sink. Soon enough, half of its immense mass was already underwater, and the main deck grew much closer to the surface of the sea. Jet looked at the Saints of Night, then addressed Knave in a calm tone. Knave, please check how things are going below deck. The citizens of the night garden knew what was happening. Some had been apprehensive, but most seemed excited about the thrilling new development. Diving into a bottomless ocean full of eldritch abominations. Wasn't that an exciting change of scenery? Maybe spending time on the indestructible living ship had made them feel too safe, but the denizens of the wandering city were quite a carefree bunch. As far as Sunny was concerned, they rarely showed the level of fear and anxiety one would expect from people living in the perilous waters of the Stormzea. But then again, Sunny could somewhat understand the strangeness of their mentality. After all, most humans were tied to their homes, and therefore to their cities. If danger arrived, they ultimately had no choice but to face it or succumb to it, since escaping was usually not an option. What would a citizen of NQSC do if some unholy nightmare creature descended upon the city? Escaping into the wilderness was hardly an option, since it would mean dying of starvation, contaminated water, poisonous air, or simply the elements. Similarly, nothing but death awaited those who would want to flee Bastion or Ravenheart. But what if their city itself could turn around and flee from danger, taking them with it? That, Sunny thought, was a fundamentally less stressful way of life. So, he mentally patted himself on the shoulder for procuring himself a wonderful moving castle. Good job. Come to think of it, once Sunny became sacred, Mimic would probably be able to turn into something of a similar G-size to Night Garden. And while it did not possess many of the wondrous abilities that the living ship did, it had its own marvelous qualities. I should feed it well. In any case, many of the passengers of the Night Garden gathered in the sorceress observation halls below the deck to watch the ship submerge, instead of hiding in their homes and praying to the dead gods. They could not see what was happening on the main deck, and the mist obscured most of the world, but still, once the surface of the sea drew close, they saw red waves breaking against the weathered hull of the living ship. And then, they were below the water. Moment of truth. The Night Garden finally submerged enough for the waves to wash over its main deck. Of course, the Dome of Shadows was protecting it at the moment, but depending on how the situation developed, Sunny would either ride the Night Garden comfortably into the depths or would be forced to dive into the abyssal darkness himself, protected by nothing except the onyx serpent shell. It's a pity I didn't kill old Tom. Summoning its shade would have been quite useful, considering the circumstances. While Sunny shivered at the memory of the huge horror of the depths, the Night Garden fell deeper into the water. Finally, the waves closed above the Shadow Dome, and the tip of the mainmast disappeared below the surface of the sea. For a while, tense silence reigned in the runic hall. Eventually, Jet asked in a hushed tone. Well, Sunny smiled. Bone dry. The Shadow Dome had been built to be just a little bit smaller than the invisible aegis protecting the main deck of the Night Garden. So, if that mysterious barrier was not capable of holding water at bay, the water would have washed over the manifested shadows. However, not even a single drop touched the surface of the dome. Which meant that Sunny had been right. The aegis was indeed capable of allowing the Night Garden to dive into the sea. Jet let out a quiet sigh. She remained silent for a while, and then said in a neutral tone. I guess that means that we are diving into the abyss. 2620 Sea Quest. The Night Garden continued to descend into the cold waters of the Stormzea. Sunny had allowed the Dome of Shadows to collapse into a torrent of flowing darkness and vanish, thus allowing Jet and the Saints of Night to see what was happening around the Titanic ship. It was a wondrous sight. There did not seem to be anything standing in the way of water, and yet it failed to wash over the decks of the Night Garden, as if pushed away by an invisible barrier. Strangely enough, that made Sunny feel like he was a colossal aquarium. Of course, an aquarium was supposed to keep aquatic shapes of life alive on dry land, not the other way around. What is the opposite of an aquarium, though? A terrarium. It was probably a terrarium. His odd thoughts were interrupted by Jet, who glanced around with a wary expression on her face and said. We will proceed slowly. Be ready to summon that dome back if the aegis begins leaking. Their initial success did not guarantee safety. After all, there could be a limit to what the invisible barrier isolating the surface decks of the night garden from hostile environments could do. Beyond that, they did not only have water to worry about, there was also pressure, oxygen, and a dozen other things that had to be accounted for in order to ensure the safety of all passengers. Personally, Sunny was sure that the Demon of Repose would have built and enchanted her ship properly, but he was all for taking all the necessary precautions. After all, demons were different from people. Who knew if they had even needed to breathe or cared about not the weight of an entire ocean resting on their shoulders? So, there was no harm in keeping a close eye on things. Soon, Ether and Bloodwave departed to perform various checks, leaving Sunny and Jet alone on the bridge. They watched the water flow upward past the night garden in silence, both secretly haunted by the memories of the tomb of Ariel. The sea around them was red, but the deeper the night garden descended, the paler its morbid hue became. Less and less light could penetrate the great mass of water, as well, so their surroundings were growing dimmer. The grotesque remains of slain nightmare creatures drifted past them from time to time, sinking at their own speed. After a while, the living ship was surrounded by utter darkness, shining with myriad lights in its embrace. The lanterns illuminating the night garden were the only source of light in the cold abyss, so, surrounded by their vibrant glow, it fell into the dark depths like a radiant nebula. The only sounds in the dead silence of the deep sea were the quiet rustle of leaves and the soft whispers of wind that blew between the masts of the Titanic ship. Jet sighed lightly. At least there's wind, that is a good sign. The presence of wind indicated that the night garden was producing its own oxygen, probably absorbing it from the surrounding water. The carbon dioxide generated by millions of people breathing in its depths was probably being absorbed by the trees growing on the main deck. Which didn't really make sense, considering that there was no sun here. However, the living ship was known to have a mystical effect on all flora growing aboard it, so Sunny would not be surprised to learn that the groves on the surface decks of the night garden could thrive even in these conditions. He himself had a tree that thrived in the darkness of the forgotten shore, after all, out there in the courtyard of the nameless temple. In any case, checking to see if the air was not growing stale was one of the tasks Ether and Bloodwave were going to perform. Nave, meanwhile, was busy monitoring the situation on the lower decks and in the cavernous holds of the living ship, where the passengers were hidden. Everything seemed to be going fine, at least for now. So, Sunny allowed himself to relax, but only a little. Both he and Jet were still tense, keeping themselves in a state of battle readiness. After all, they did not know what problems the night garden could experience while descending into the dark depths of the Stormsia after decades of only sailing on its surface. On top of that, there were external threats they could encounter, as well, and the nature of their environment dictated an entirely different approach to battle, one that was inherently disadvantageous for land predators like them. Even if the descent proceeded without any accidents, though, what awaited them in the abyssal depths was the Eternal City, all the horrors populating it, and the unknown calamity that had slaughtered all the other nightmare creatures in the waters above them. How exciting! Time passed slowly, but even after a long while, nothing seemed to happen. The darkness of the surrounding waters had grown even more absolute. Then, it grew eerie and frightening. Jet glanced around with a total lack of amusement on her pale face and leaned on her scythe, seemingly seeking comfort in the cold steel of its ghostly blade. Ah, I don't like this at all. Sunny, however, was not inclined to agree. I am quite happy, though. She looked at him and raised an eyebrow. He nodded to the eerie darkness outside the shimmering sphere of light produced by the night garden. I think we have more or less reached the depth where I gave up on pursuing old Tom. The pressure was giving trouble to Nave and Bloodwave back then, but do you feel anything now? No, the hull may be creaking a little, but it seems like the night garden is protecting its passengers from the weight of the sea, too. Jet smiled faintly. That's true. Sunny lingered for a few seconds. Have you been to the Chained Isles before the war? Jet tilted her head a little. Not really. Why? He shrugged. It's just that diving this DR felt like experiencing the crushing all over again. Not the most pleasant experience. Of course, on the Chained Isles, enormous chains prevented islands from rising too high, so he had only ever suffered the most harmless extent of the crushing. Its full wrath was far more devastating, capable of obliterating even the most powerful abominations. The master of the Ivory Island wielded the crushing as a component now. If used as a weapon, it could decimate entire regions. If used as a shield, it could prevent even a god from reaching the heavenly island unscathed. Sunny wanted to comment on how the pressure of the abyssal depths was similar to that, but then fell silent abruptly. Out there, in the darkness beyond the light of the night garden, A colossal tentacle slowly drifted in the cold void, moving past the descending ship in the distance. It was oddly limp and still. Noticing his expression, Jet frowned. "What's the matter?" Sunny peered into the darkness for a while, silent. Eventually, he responded in a quiet tone. "I think it's old Tom. It seems to be dead."